This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Hello and welcome into episode 135 of Slick Talk. I'm your host, Blackstone Joe, and yes, this is indeed 135. Look, on the previous episode, I called 134 135 a couple of times. And after a long day of poring over the data, exchanging calls and emails and all the rest, you jump into the fiery crucible that is the Slick Talk recording studio. It's 2024, going into 2025, 5 on the mind. Ergo, 134 became 135, just temporarily. But here we are at episode 135. And clerical mishaps out of the way, we have quite a bit to discuss. Starting with a call from a friend of the pod, Travis. He had a question that I think applies to perhaps many of you out there. That being zinc and phosphorus, the additives that comprise ZDDP, and what the best levels are for an engine with flat tappets. Now, he brought up a couple of examples, Mobil 1 Classic and Valvoline VR1. These are both good oils, plenty of ZDDP to go around. The levels aren't exactly the same, but that's to be expected when you're talking about two different brands and two different blends. However, both of them are going to be just fine, regardless of whether or not they're being used in an engine with flat tappets, even ones going back to, say, the 50s. Now, this may shock many of you, but the exact amount of ZDDP isn't really much of a concern even for those older engines with flat tappets. Now, this is a concern we've addressed before in great detail by the president of Blackstone Laboratories, Ryan Stark, and for a full breakdown of the experiment he ran where he took aircraft oil. Now, keep in mind, this is oil that contains no significant amount of zinc or phosphorus. He ran it in his engine with, you guessed it, flat tappets. And not only did that engine not blow up, it's still running. Now, why think about aircraft oil? I'll discuss this briefly, but please do check out this complete article, which is available on our website. Just go under the info tab, drop down to articles, and you'll find ZDD What. That's the title of the article itself. But in short, I'll tell you that this experiment was brought on by the fact that we're familiar with piston aircraft engines that don't use any of this additive in their oil, and obviously they still get around just fine, despite the fact that there's not any significant zinc or phosphorus. And that brought on the experiment, that being using aircraft oil in an automotive application and seeing how the wear levels, how the engine would respond. Now, of course, this isn't to say that you should switch to aircraft oil. This was merely an experiment to look into zinc, phosphorus, the lack thereof, how engines would respond to it. But it is an interesting breakdown, one that I think many of you would be surprised to see the results from. So check out that article in full. But in general, if you have an engine that is older and you're looking to take care of it, you're worried specifically about the camshaft and how it might respond to a lack of this additive or that, keep in mind that any API certified oil is going to have plenty of zinc and phosphorus to go around. It's not so much the exact levels you need to worry about, but that you're buying an API certified product, one that has an appropriate viscosity. The additives and their exact levels aren't what you need to be concerned about. We find that as long as you're running a good oil that has an appropriate viscosity, the engine will be just fine. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard the term marriage material. Well, you might be, but the oil and the system you're using it in, they probably shouldn't be together forever. You'll want to look into an amicable separation at some point. Now, most people agree that engines need an oil change, albeit some folks are a little stubborn about when to do it. But others seem to believe that transmissions, differentials, they don't ever need one. Well, there's some common myths to dispel, so I'll start there. One being that you shouldn't change the oil in a transmission, for example, because some claim it creates a bond that you don't want to disturb. And that's not really the case. So as the oil is in use, this goes for any system, it starts to endure some change. Metal content builds up, it can become oxidized, which results in an accumulation of solid material. It can even lose its viscosity, and of course all of these things can be affected to an even greater extent by the presence of contamination. Hopefully there isn't any, but it can result in more metal and an even greater breakdown of the oil's physical properties. That goes for a transmission, just like it would anything else. Now, some people will say it should stay in use forever, and that even includes some manufacturers. The term lifetime is even applied to some transmission oils. And well, give two of the same car to two different owners, and you're bound to wind up with some variation, if not a lot, in the use they see. As such, it stands to reason that metal accumulation, physical properties, etc. are going to reflect that difference in use. As such, it's a good idea to at least get a look at that fluid's condition in testing before choosing to run it forever and ever. There may be a lot of metal present, there may be a lot of insolubles present, or the viscosity could be breaking down, resulting in an oil change being a good idea regardless of lifetime being in the name. And I actually had the opportunity to have this conversation away from the data and with a friend of mine who is taking care of a GMC Acadia. He's had it for a long time, I think north of 150,000 miles at this point. And we got to talking about fluid maintenance, and he mentioned that he was looking into taking better care of the car in general, and I just happened to wonder if changing the transmission fluid had ever crossed his mind. For some people, there's an interval in mind that, not unlike the 3,000-mile oil change for the engine, they'll just consider it a safe bet to change the transmission fluid at. I've heard 70,000 miles, 100,000 miles. Of course, the manufacturer recommendation can vary greatly from what we would suggest or what our averages would show as typical for any given model or customer. And for my friend in his Acadia, he had never thought to change the transmission fluid and had also heard at least once that changing that fluid probably wasn't something he'd need to worry about. Now, after further discussion, he decided to go ahead and change it and then see how the transmission was going to respond. Not only is the transmission doing just fine, he even noted that it seems to be shifting better than it was before. As for why that might be, it's possible that removing metal content from the system allowed the oil to do a better job of cleaning and lubricating, resulting in shifting improving. One thing is for sure, the transmission is still around, still kicking, and doing well. But of course, taking one experience, one owner's maintenance strategy as a rule is not the goal of this episode. This is merely to encourage you to avoid worrying about putting fresh oil in a system, because adding fresh oil is never a bad thing. And the same reason why you would change engine oil applies not only to transmissions, but differentials as well. That system is also subject to the oil becoming oxidized as it does the job of cleaning and lubricating, and as those oxidized solids accumulate, they can reach a level that will result in the oil becoming more abrasive, and the same thing goes for metal content as well. As with engines, you want to find an ideal oil change interval, and doing so can start with the manufacturer recommendation, or you can start by sampling that oil without changing it. That is, of course, dependent upon whether or not the system that you have has dipstick that you can draw a sample from that area, but if you can't, if you have to change an entire sump, you can at least begin to dial in what oil change interval is ideal for you. We, of course, have averages for comparison as well. So if you don't know where to start, you can even just call or email us and request the average interval for whatever model it is you're sampling. Take that and then send in a sample to begin your file. We can do a nice comparison with our averages. But of course, in the real world, a nice apples-to-apples comparison isn't always doable. So if you need to sample an unknown interval, or if you've already gone quite a bit longer than average, I would still encourage sending that oil in for testing. If it's been a longer or a shorter run, we can still compare the wear rates, that being how much metal has been made per mile or per kilometer, whatever interval it is that you're sampling, and see how the levels compare. No matter what the system is, the oil will gradually accumulate metal, accumulate solids, And of course, there's always the standard diagnostic overview that you gain with a used oil report, where you can look for other things that you might not even have suspected, be that contamination from, say, water, or checking the viscosity to see if it's broken down. A viscosity breakdown can also look different depending on what type of system you're talking about. So a thin viscosity would be concerning for transmission oil, whereas a thick viscosity would be more worrisome for, say, a differential or engine oil. Whatever the system it is, changing the oil, separating that from the system is in fact a good idea, at least once in a while. It's not a divorce. Think of it as an amicable separation. An oil analysis will help you find when that separation should take place. Or, better yet, you may find out that you can go even longer between oil change intervals than you already are. It all starts with analysis. So if you'd like to learn more, go to blackstone-labs.com. Thanks for listening. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.